until we got the nozzles on the hoses. Um, and also the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, the black stuff, the soot, the heavier stuff. It was aerosolizing as well. So when BP got around to doing worker safety trainings, it was actually in June when we forced them to, because workers were being told, and then workers were told what was personal protective equipment, but they were told not to wear it. And I'm going to let Greg share some of that story. But Sheree, after this, you began doing town hall meetings, and you discovered that there's quite a few people that are just now connecting the dots 10 years later between their health effects and what happened to them as exposures during the BP disaster. So maybe you want to share just some what you saw at the Lafitte town hall, and Sheree will be making some shorter videos of this, and we will be posting some of these people's stories. But Sheree?
Yeah, going back to the day after Frank died, which was the 8th anniversary, where Jamie and Greg spoke. There were many other victims that spoke as well, and I kind of noticed that really appreciated General Honore and Jonathan Henderson bringing the message out. But when you looked in the audience, there really wasn't a lot of people there, and it was at City Hall in New Orleans. And I thought that the message needed to be brought down to the lower parishes, the lower communities, because, you know, if they're sick down there, maybe they haven't connected the dots, because I would have thought Frank and I were educated. You know, Frank had 2 master's degrees, very smart man. And yet, you know, it doesn't even occur to us to say, oh, BP oil spill, does that count? So I created disappearingvictims.net, a website, and I created a 50-minute documentary of various people's illnesses and Frank's challenge as well. And I started premiering it down. The first one was in Lafitte. That's where Frank had initially set up his own command center for the company. And what was kind of interesting, I had no idea who was going to show up. It was competing with a football game. I don't think it was the Saints, but I started, you know, somebody had put out a lot of chairs, and I started saying, you know what, I was really expecting maybe 25 people to show up. And it was just amazing. And especially a lot of men individually were coming in. There were, you know, men coming in with their wives, but I mean, it was like, hi, I'm Larry, I have lymphoma, you know, and it almost felt like it was running a grief group where people could get to connect with each other and realize that they're not alone. And you could watch the light bulbs go off in their head, where they're starting to, like me, connect the dots, you know, that, gee, maybe all of this is going on with me. I had no idea it was going on with these other people. And, you know, maybe it is the BP oil spill. So then, you know, the discussions started amongst themselves. And I think the meeting lasted for about 3 hours, and hardly anybody left. We kind of had to start shutting things down, you know, to get, you know, people to leave each other. So that was a similar experience. I think we had about four town halls, but yeah, I think I hit the nail on the head when I called it disappearing victims, because it seems to me that that was their strategy all along, where, you know, I think what could have saved Frank, well, you know, with the information that in 2014, just to try to minimize their payout to the initial victims, you know, they say, oh, well, it takes years for these cancers to come. So that way they could distance their payout. And I would think, you know, even like with the information that they knew at that time, if they would have spent probably a few $100s on a trifold brochure, just a brochure, to circulate and keep stocked to these locations, to tell people the dangers, you know, what they're risking and how to minimize their exposure. I don't see a small thing like that would have gone a long way. I think it would have my husband here today. You know, I think there'd be a lot of people that were alive that would have, you know, because I think they're just dying off. There's a lot of people that don't have a mouthpiece talking for them, you know, and they just quietly die. And I think that's what BP was counting on all along.
Sadly, this is exactly what I saw. I stayed in the Gulf Coast area for a year, and I've been back from 2011 after the first year, every year to 2017, twice a year, spending a couple months in the spring and in the fall, going across the Gulf Coast communities, again in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. And every year when I hold these town hall meetings, I see exactly the same thing. Newer faces every year, 2011, 2012, 2013, 14, 15, 16, newer faces as people are slowly connecting the dots between their ongoing health issues and that they all started during the summer of 2010. What's going on? And these were supposed to be 1 or 2 hour town hall meetings. They would go from 6 o'clock, and I would not shut the door until the last question was answered. And that was often midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. People were hungry for information,
Yes.
but now we're 10 years into this and we need to see some action. So that's what this is all about. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Sheree is going to be joining us again in episode 4, April 21st, when we actually pull all these solutions together and talk about what action steps people can take. So thank you, Sheree. And right now we are going to turn to, oh my gosh, Greg and Jamie Brown, who they are, as they say, in the country in Louisiana. There they are. And what we're going to do, again, is look at this map, because Greg was hired by Frank. And again, this is the map where he was working the coastline from Grand Isle to Venice. Lafitte, by the way, is the across the bayou from Barataria. So you have some bearing on all this. And what we're going to do before we go any further is actually, we're going to look at one more slide. So the very next slide, Saskia, to help frame, nope, the one with the, yes, yep, you hopped over it. Go back up, up, up. It's another map. And this time right there, it has the air quality levels in the corner. I want to explain this because Greg was a first responder and Jamie was in Lafitte, which we now know is right across the bayou from Barataria. And so she was a resident, a coastal resident during this time. And it turned out during this time, Dillard University, which is in New Orleans, and Texas Southern University over in Houston, did took the air quality monitoring data that were available from these 6 parishes that are underlined: Terrebonne, Lafourche, Jefferson, actually, no, it should be St. Charles, St. Bernard, and Plaquemines. And the air quality was measured from May through September of 2010. And they used all the available data, the official data, the unofficial data, BP's data, EPA's data. And what they found was that this entire area exceeded the air quality for unacceptable risk level that's set by EPA of 13 parts per billion. And in many cases, it also exceeded the low cancer risk level. But the point is that it should have triggered the health officials to say there was a cause for concern and to say we're going to take some preventative action. It also, the air quality monitoring data that they accessed for the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, the fine particulate matter, the standard here is the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for enforcement of the Clean Air Act. That is 12, it's 12 micrograms per meter cubed. So that is the equivalent of 12 parts per billion. That was also exceeded in this area and should also have been a cause for concern. for the health of coastal residents and residents throughout these parishes. So with that in mind, we're going to go back to watch the Browns video that Sheree has assembled, and then we'll come back to the Brown story after the video is shared. Thank you, Saskia, for putting this up.
How y'all doing today? I was on the first responders team of the oil cleanup out here in Louisiana, and we started from Grand Isle and went all the way to Venice on the first responders cleanup team. And during that time, we were out setting anchors for the hard boom, and we would pile drive PVC pipe into the points of the places that we were going to block off to keep the oil from getting down into the bayous and everything and contaminating everything. And during that time, I got water in my boots. Well, the water had already been sprayed with Corexit, and it caused my legs to get infected. Well, that infection got into my blood system, and it got worse, worse, and worse. And I ended up going to the doctors, and I went to a chemical specialist in Florida. Had to go from there to another doctor in Dallas, Texas. And then they sent me to a brain specialist and found out that I have some fried brain stem cells and stuff. But after I ended up spending all my money, my legs got worse and got to hurting so bad that I wanted to go ahead and just cut them off. So I was going to cut below my knees and peel the skin back, cut my legs off. My wife grabbed my son and said, no. So they took me to the VA. I hadn't been to the VA in over 30 something years because I'd never been sick, took care of myself. Well, I told her, well, I don't think they'll even look at me. Well, the first thing they did was put me in. They said that was real bad. And they tested for all my legs at that time and tested to see what was going on. And they couldn't find any bacteria or any living organisms. Then they determined that it was chemicals that had chemical burn from the inside out. And I let my wife tell it. She's a little better at this probably.
So from his legs, he was in the hospital at the VA for a week. No other symptoms, nothing else wrong with him. And he was under medical attention, doctors and nurses, from September 2010 to November 2010. He swelled up 3 times his normal size. Everything in his body shut down. He stopped breathing 3 times. His lungs, his kidneys, everything shut down. They admitted him for 2 weeks. All the tests were coming up negative. So they treated him as a soldier with Agent Orange. What they were doing was working, so they continued to do it. And after 2 weeks, he was able to be released. He was released Tuesday before Thanksgiving. And that Thursday, we brought my son to his dad. And it was a 5-6 hour trip. On the way home, I was feeling sick myself for 2 weeks while he was in the hospital. We stopped at the emergency room. I was told I had an upper respiratory infection and a urinary tract infection and sent home with a prescription. 5 o'clock the next morning, I woke up to go to the bathroom. I expired and died in my bathroom. I came to by myself. I am a walking miracle. And I went to the emergency room because I busted my lip. There was blood on the floor that came out from my body. And I was told by 3 doctors, how are you sitting here talking to me? Because what happened to you don't happen. You expired and you were not here. I don't have a doctor here to help you. Next thing I know, I'm strapped in an ambulance to another hospital and told anything could happen along the way, that in the hospital care, if I went down, there was nothing they could do to save me. I was in ICU 3 days. I was in the hospital 2 weeks. How do two people, normal people, become chronically ill within a week of each other after the spill? Is this normal? It's not. How do I deal with it? How do I live with it? I have friends. I have family. We have friends and family. We have grandkids. You can't stress. You just have to live one day at a time.
So with that, we will go back to the slides. And I actually want to look let's just stay right here. This is a good slide. And I just want to share, to frame this a little bit, you'll find in the March 25th recording a little bit more depth of what I'm about to say, which is that Jamie was simply breathing the air, which we now know was toxic, okay? But Jamie is also going to share part of a story, something called contact dermatitis. And she washed Greg's clothes. And also, you'll see, actually, and why don't we pick it up from there? But let's go first. This is you pre-spill. So I want to share I have some slides up, Greg, for you to talk about. Maybe the next slide of what the marshes look like and what you were actually doing when you were in the marshes. So we could put the next slide up. And then Greg, talk a little bit about the booms again, and also your BP training. When did you get that training?
I didn't get the training till probably 2 months in before we got trained, because we were the very first ones, and they were starting to train the other people first as they came in. We were already out there. And what we're doing here in these pictures, we would actually, the hard boom is the long boom that has a drape that hangs down about 4 feet under the water. And we were setting 174-pound anchors on the marsh and locking them in so we could tie the hard boom to it and stretch it across waterways to stop the oil from coming in, killing all the baby shrimp and poisoning the land and everything else. And during that time, it's when I got water in my boots, and that's what infected my legs.
So you were in open skiffs. I want to make this clear. You had no cabin on your skiff. You were right on the water, correct?
Right, right.
And when you were putting the boom in, you were reaching over the transom or whatever, the side of your boat, and getting even closer to the water with your nose. Is that correct?
Oh, Lord, yeah. Yeah, we'd get splashed with water and it would burn your skin. And that's where I have a lot of pre-cancers on my arms that have to keep freezing. And they would come by with those airplanes and helicopters spraying that corrects it.
Were they
sink
spraying,
the oil.
were they spraying over you as you worked?
They were spraying real close to us, so I'm sure the wind would blow it on us. But it was getting into the water, and you could tell there's something was different about the water, because anything you poured into the water would bead up and go across the top of the water. It wouldn't go into the water. And
Wow. Okay. So where, and you were working well over 14, 16-hour days?
oh yeah, we'd work way before daylight to way after dark.
And where did you sleep at night? Did you have camps, or were you in hotels on the coast, or did you go home? Where did you go?
No, we'd sleep on our boats, and sometimes we'd come in.
All right. So
And
this is, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It's a little difficult with the delay. I just want to point out that these exposures are not anything like what is covered in the OSHA standards. OSHA standards are based on 40-hour work weeks, based on 8-hour days. that gives you 16 hours a day to go to home, which is presumably not in an exposed area, and clear your body out by breathing in clean air and breathing out toxic air. Literally, your body can do that by peeing, by getting this stuff out of your body before you go to work again. There was no time in your oil spill work. You were exposed 24/7. That's why I asked where you were sleeping at night. You were sleeping, breathing, everything. You were in this exposure. This is called, and you did this for months. So this is now called well over even an intermediate exposure. This is a chronic exposure where you're exposed every day, day in, day out to this stuff. And this is some of the most damaging exposures there are, because your body is filling up. If you think of your body as a rain barrel and drip, 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 these pollutants coming in, your body is filling up faster than it empties. That's what happened. And when bodies do that, they start to park these chemicals in the fatty tissue around your organs, the fatty tissue in your brain, the fatty tissue in your body. And then when you exercise, like now, 10 years later, let's get to the next slide. So I just have more pictures of what this looks like out in the field, where this is Barataria Bay, but I want to stay on the story here. I want to get to like where you exercise now and you sweat, what happens? Okay. So, because
Well, when I sweat, it stinks, and also has a peculiar smell. It's this weird smell. It's not like a regular person sweating.
And Jamie, oops, sorry.
Here she is. Go ahead, Jamie.
We didn't have the pictures of you with blisters on your hands, because that's where, so why don't you describe the blisters on your hands that occurred back in 2010 and 11, and that occurred again now, when you touch Greg's clothes, sweaty clothes.
If I touch the sweat on his head or his clothes, I get rashes on my hands again. If I sleep on his pillows, I get rashes on my face. So something's still coming out of him that affects me. So when he was working, it was like big water blisters on my hands, mostly on my fingers and the palm of my hands, and been to doctors, what they say, contact dermatitis. Okay, so that means you came in contact with something. I don't change anything because I'm sensitive. I kept trying to think in my head, what did I do different? What did I touch different? Nothing. So I continued to go to the doctor. These blisters were like water blisters on top of each other, and it was very painful. They never really did burst or pop. They just kind of, I guess, seeped into my skin and went away. But they would have flare-ups, and then they would go back down.
Yeah. So this is what I saw during the Exxon Valdez as well. They're called contact dermatitis, which is what you had. The workers who were out on the Exxon Valdez disaster were washing the clothes and getting the same problems that you described on their hands and in their respiratory system. So, so I want to talk about what life is like now. You talked a little bit about what your doctors are doing to treat you, and they're treating it just like Agent Orange now, and it's day by day. So go ahead and explain what life is like right now.
Well, really, both of us, it's either him or me or both at the same time. For him, they've had doctors say he's kind of like a lab rat because everything has been affected. Sometimes his body will reject something, or he'll act different than other people with certain medicines, certain treatments. So they kind of have to test things on him. For me, when I went down at home in 2010, I had a double pulmonary embolism where both lungs were filled to capacity with blood clots. So that's what happened with that. I mean, I continue to have to take Coumadin for the rest of my life, which is a blood thinner. I have to have my blood checked at least every 2 to 4 weeks to check the blood level to make sure the blood is not too thick or too thin. It's just ongoing different things that continue to happen physically, mentally.
All right. So I am really thankful to all of you for sharing your stories today. I want to stress that we are all learning from each other, including the medical community. Chemical illnesses was not a illness that was recognized in 2010. It was not part of the International Classification of Disease Coding System, ICD-9, that the doctors were using at the time. You know, you go to a doctor and you describe the symptoms and the doctor's listening and he's checking little boxes. Well, chemical illnesses was not one of the boxes that could be checked. And if you check a box, then the doctor can get reimbursed by his insurer, which meant that no doctor gave a written diagnosis of chemical illness during the BP disaster and the follow-up of it. Chemical illness was not recognized until 2015. Okay, so where we can learn now is from each other. If the VA clinic is treating first responders based on what they've learned from Chemical Orange, then the ordinary occupational and environmental medicine doctors, this is a specialty field. What Jamie is dealing with is a specialty field. Occupational environmental medicine doctors. So the general practice doctors need to say, oh my God, I need to have you see a specialist, an OEM doctor. Then the OEM doctors can look for the chemical illnesses. They know how to properly recognize and treat these illnesses to minimize their impacts on your body. And maybe they need to know the techniques that are being used to deal with the Agent Orange, with the vets. So we've learned some ideas here that we're going to be all compiling at the end. And those ideas, to backtrack now from where we are, we learned from Sheree that, my God, it would have been really helpful to have brochures, to have better communication from the health officials, the states, about our disasters in real time. You know, what is in a brochure, like what we're having now with COVID-19, you know, same thing. These are dangerous chemicals. What can you do to minimize your exposure in the man-made disasters, the oil spill disasters? And as far as from IRA, we learned that there's technology available to take real-time data. We can go to the next slide, Saskia. There's real-time data that we can use to take real-time action during oil disasters. And overall, we need to update our national contingency plan. So we will be learning more about all this. Again, please join us next Tuesday, April 7th, for another session. This time we're going to be looking at more of the residents, more of the stories from residents who were exposed from breathing the air. And we're going to have another surprise guest who will bring some technical expertise. So thank you all.
One other thing real quick. The
Yes,
problem here in Louisiana, we both have seen several doctors. So I was going to LSU and I've had 3 doctors tell me the problem is, they said, we're sorry, Ms. Brown, you have several things going on, not just one thing. And us as physicians really don't know because this has never happened before. Finally, someone said that. We have no specialists here to deal with this. That's what we've been begging for since it first happened.
Occupational and environmental medicine is a specialty field that came sort of evolved in 1988 with this EPA sick building syndrome and it wasn't really well accepted before because other doctors were seeing parallel symptoms. Your body only has so many ways to say it's sick. And so there was some competition for, well, I can treat this better than you can treat it. But now occupational environmental medicine is a recognized field and it knows how to treat these multiple pathways and systems that are affected by exposures to oil and the toxic chemical dispersants that were used during the BP disaster response. Thank you for adding that. So again, everybody, I encourage you all to listen in again next week. Please go to the alert website for recordings, where you can link to the alert YouTube channel for the past recordings. Join us. We're trying to support our campaign here. We're raising money to bring awareness, create these brochures, take action steps. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.